hemisphere about issues about which many of us feel very strongly, but are also very pertinent, very much in the news today. I'll start with a brief introduction of each of the four speakers. After that, I'll be asking an opening pair of questions, and then there'll be follow-up questions, some of them for all four speakers, some of them for just some. And we'll hope to have time for questions from the audience at the end, but we have pre-requested questions to try to get to some of the issues that we know the organizers had in mind, and we're going to first take time for that. Our speakers, I'm starting just closest to me, Yossi Kuder, a native of Israel, specializes in Middle Eastern affairs, served in the Israeli Defense Forces, studied in Portland State University, Columbia, and Seton Hall. He has served as executive director of Americans for a Safe Israel. He's hosted several radio shows in New York and Washington. He's a freelance writer. Currently serves as executive director of the American Jewish Congress, New Jersey, Pennsylvania region, and is the co-founder and director of the Interfaith Task Force for America and Israel, and host of a radio talk show that can be heard every Wednesday at 12:30 on WNWR AM 1540 in Philadelphia. Professor Ari Aflalo, who I guess most of you know, teaches here in international trade law, international business transactions, and contracts. He's of Moroccan French descent and lived in Israel for many years while studying at Tel Aviv University. Professor Aflalo has also studied at Boston University, at Harvard Law School, and before he started teaching, he practiced for several years in New York City, focusing on cross-border commercial and financial transactions between Europe and the United States. Roxanne Asaf received her BA from Loyola of the South in New Orleans, a master's from Northwestern School of Journalism. She moved to Bethlehem and Jerusalem in 1999 for 1 year and began working for the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, the magazine. In Jerusalem, she worked on various products as a writer, editor, researcher, and project developer for various organizations. Since her return to Chicago, she's written about issues concerning Arab Americans in the Midwest, and also written under the byline of Roxanne Ellis Rodriguez Asaf to incorporate her Latin and Anglo heritage in addition to her Arab heritage. And she continues to produce, write, and edit video productions and teaches a course at the Art Institute of Chicago. Susan Abu Hawa is an award-winning writer and a human rights activist whose essays have appeared in newspapers like the New York Daily News, the Chicago Tribune, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Christian Science Monitor. She's a Shattered Illusions, and Searching Janine. Her work has been translated into several languages, distributed on the internet. She left a successful career in neuroscience in 2002 to devote more time to her foundation, Playgrounds for Palestine, Inc., and her writings. She's just completed her first novel, a work of historic fiction, which is awaiting a publisher. But Playgrounds for Palestine has recently acquired its 5th playground, and she will travel to Hebron in January for the installation. So again, with thanks to all of our panelists, we had a full set of opening questions that we'd like each of them to respond to. And the combination, the first is, what do you see as the structure of an eventual peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian crisis? And how does Yasser Arafat's death make the path toward that resolution more or less viable? And I guess we'll start just right here next to me.
Well, thank you all, and thank the committee for inviting me to join this panel. I want to salute the combination here of, the international and the Jewish students. And let me address first or rather correct, the way you have formulated your question, if I may. There's no mere crisis in the Middle East. We are beyond crisis. We have an historic conflict known as the Arab-Israeli conflict, which lasted for the better part of the 20th century and continues into the 21st. Currently, the Palestinian Authority is a den of thieves. Arafat and his Tunis cronies created a mafia that intimidates innocent Palestinians both Christians and Muslims into submission. Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza do not live the glamorous life of Arafat's cronies. They suffer from a lack of employment, decent education, housing, and basic services such as telephone, sewage, and clean water. Incidentally, before the Intifada, Israel was the major employer of Palestinians. I interviewed Palestinians living in refugee camps who knew very well who oppressed them. Israelis, for security reasons, made life difficult for them in moving from town to town. But Arafat and his gang made them miserable in their homes, schools, and businesses. To complain was to suffer, and is to suffer, beating, imprisonment, and sometimes death. Matt Reese's recent book, Cain's Field, Faith, Fratricide, and Fear, sheds a detailed light on this story, which the major media fails to bring to you for reasons of ideology and their support for their perceived underdog. Agreements such as the Oslo Accords are not worth the printed ink unless the Arab world and the Palestinians recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state and are ready to end the violent hatred of Jews embedded in their textbooks, their media, and their mosques. A peaceful resolution will take time, perhaps a long time. The only way for a real peace to be established is for the Arab states in general, and the Palestinians in particular, to adopt democracy. Democratic states live in peace with one another because people in democracy have a stake in maintaining social, economic, and especially political stability. The foremost prerequisite for a peaceful solution of the conflict is for the Palestinian leadership to eradicate the terrorist infrastructure. The Palestinian government that will emerge must control the gunmen and the guns. This means reining in Fatah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the others. Fareed Zakaria, in his recent book, The Future of Freedom, writes, and I quote, "Israel has become a great excuse for much of the Arab world, the way for regimes to deflect attention from their own failures. The desired and practical structures for peace are for the Palestinian government to become transparent and to begin to address the social and economic problems plaguing the Palestinians." Arafat was a career terrorist who never transformed into a Palestinian Nelson Mandela. He never sought to address the miserable conditions of his people by providing housing for those refugees in camps, never built schools with an eye towards training youngsters to assume jobs in the modern economy, or created a sewer system and clean water to prevent diseases, despite billions of dollars he received. His entire career was devoted to the armed struggle. Abu Mazen, or any other emerging successor to Arafat, will not be able to clean up the mess Arafat left behind anytime soon. The new leadership must focus on creating the rule of law that will encourage foreign and domestic investment in an entrepreneurial class will emerge. This will lead to a creation of a civil society, and as economic reforms create a semblance of prosperity, contracts will strengthen that rule of law. This in turn will impact, you lawyers should understand that, this in turn will impact on the political structure by forcing reform and increased freedoms, leading to the emergence of a civil society. This will allow for a free press, trade unions, and the enfranchisement of women and political parties. Once these elements are in place, the road to democracy will be easy. And with democracy will come a meaningful and a lasting peace. There is no shortcuts to a real peace, and no amount of Israeli concessions, territorial or otherwise, will bring about a lasting peace any sooner